Do you have any plans for Thanksgiving?
Nothing yet. How about you?
Family's coming, and they're going to stay for a couple nights.
At
in
your place?
Watertown. No, in Watertown.
Yeah, because I've seen your apartment, and there's really not enough space for your mom, your dad, and whoever else wants to join you.
Hey, somebody would have to sleep in the hall, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I still remember the first full Thanksgiving where I was working there with you. Your parents were nice enough to bring down a dish for me.
Yeah, we had some stuff here, so we're like, we would have had you come up, but you had to man the helm.
Oh, jeez. I was the only one working that day. It was just ridiculous. It got to the point where I went into work. I'm like, I'm wearing my pajamas. I don't care. You never know if someone's going to try to deep fry a turkey in their apartment.
So, Kevin, you see anything in the news lately that's like the pride and joy of Boston?
Is it the possibility that the Boston Red Sox might be aggressively pursuing free agents or trades this winter for the first time in who knows how many years?
No, not what I was referring to.
I think I do know what you're talking about because it's not sports related, but it is Boston related. It is specifically Newton's Own that is making international news.
I gotta say, this sexiest man alive thing has gone off the rails the past few years. But yeah, John Krasinski rated this year's sexiest man alive.
When you say sexiest man alive, the first time they did that was in the 80s. You'd be thinking, oh, they've been doing this every year for nearly 40 years. Isn't this kind of illogical?
But John Krasinski, I mean, yeah, he's funny, and that's an attractive trait, but yeah, that's not sexy. I mean, yeah, like goofiest man alive, maybe, but...
Oh, well, I mean, he doesn't care. He won.
He did, and it has a little bit of a connection to our movie today because his wife.
Oh, yes, Emily Blunt. So she's the star of the movie, one of the stars of the movie that we are discussing this week, which is The Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah, so this was my pick this week. Kevin, what are your thoughts off the bat? What's the verdict?
So this is my first time watching it. I have been aware of it for a very long time, obviously, because it's a staple of pop culture and it's been made into several memes. After finally watching it this year, I totally agree with one comment that John Krasinski made about the movie himself. He considers this one of his favorite movies, and he said that this is channel surfing kryptonite.
It's one of those films that it's like you just, watch the next scene, and then 10 scenes later you've watched the whole movie.
Well, it's a smartly done movie. It's intelligible. It all makes sense. It's good storytelling. That's why it's so successful. And there are a lot of charming, eccentric characters that have your attention the entire way.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, some movies are plot-driven, some are character-driven. This movie is definitely in that character-driven department.
And we also got to talk about fashion since we're talking about a movie that's about fashion. So,
absolutely.
Coda, what are you wearing today?
I am wearing you're going to like this, it's Beskar pattern shirt, and then I also got my little Beskar meteorite pendant on some Navajo pearls. How about you?
Just wearing a long sleeve tee that has the logo of a construction company my family worked with in the last year, and I'm wearing a flannel over that. But
flannels for fall, groundbreaking.
What's that one line in the movie where they're trying to come up with ideas for the spring issue? It's like, oh, we can use
florals for spring. Groundbreaking.
I'm not a very groundbreaking fashion guy, so it's whatever will cover me and let me get through the day with dignity.
Tell us a little bit about how this movie came to be.
Well, originally it was based on a novel by Lauren Weisberger. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. It was published in 2003. I remember my mom had a copy of it laying around the house that I saw several times. And the information that I found out about this was that it's part of a subgenre called chick lit. And it's literature that's targeted towards women, and it has a lot of romance themes. It's now considered outdated.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about chick lit as in literature, not the gum chiclets. But we later get to the term chick flick, and we're going to talk about that at the end a little bit. But how much does that term hold up anymore?
Yeah, we're going to have a big discussion about that. This is a movie that was released the summer of 2006, June 30th, 2006, and it has quite an iconic cast that holds up to this day. With Anne Hathaway, she was just coming out of the family-friendly genre with The Princess Diaries.
Yep.
She's still working today. She's won an Academy Award. She went on to play Catwoman in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, so there's that.
Yeah, this was kind of her big drama debut.
Yeah, her transition from family-friendly sort of films to being a serious actress to be reckoned with for years to come.
Speaking of another serious actress to be reckoned with.
Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep also, who is a force to be reckoned with, who played the iconic Miranda Priestley. She was even nominated for an Academy Award for this. There's also Stanley Tucci, who plays Nigel Kipling, which sounds like a very English name, don't you think?
Yeah, it does, and he's definitely not British. But yeah, I think like Nigel Thornberry, smashing.
Oh, yeah, or Rudyard Kipling, like Nigel Thornberry reading a Rudyard Kipling poem.
Yeah, no.
And there's Emily Blunt, as we were discussing earlier, who plays Emily Charlton. And Adrian Grenier, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, he plays Nate Cooper, who is Anne Hathaway's boyfriend in this movie. And he was also in Entourage, hit series on HBO. And this movie was directed by David Frankel, who also made the TV series Inventing Anna and the movie Marley and Me, about life and love with the world's worst Labrador. Did you happen to see that movie?
I didn't. I didn't see Inventing Anna. Yeah, I didn't see that either, but that one I've heard a lot of good things about.
I've refused to watch Marley and Me because I've had 5 Labradors in my life, and I know the story ends the same way every time, so doesn't matter really what happens in the movie. When the dog dies, that's an emotional toll.
In film school, definitely tell you to stay away from that.
I always bring this up. One of my favorite horror movies is The Conjuring. It's brilliant. It's terrifying. But the only scene in that movie I skip is when the family dog dies in the beginning.
Understandable.
The screenplay was written by Aline Brosh McKenna. So she also wrote the scripts to 27 Dresses, We Bought a Zoo, and she was involved in the TV show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. It was produced by Wendy Feinerman, whose credits include Forrest Gump. And she was one of the producers that took home the Oscar when it won Best Picture that year.
All-star cast, all-star crew.
There are a lot of Ivy Leaguers associated with it. Like Frankel and McKenna, they both went to Harvard. Feinerman went to UPenn's Wharton School of Business, which is the best business school in the country. Weisberger went to Cornell. Meryl Streep went to Yale School of Drama. And Emily Blunt, she's not an Ivy Leaguer herself, but she married the man of the hour that we were discussing, John Krasinski, who's an alum of Brown University.
It's always amazing to me how these really academic places put out some of the best people in the film and entertainment industry in general. But it just shows, having that background, you can go many different directions.
The one thing we're going to have to get into before we really analyze everything is that this is more of a character-driven movie. So we've done other movies where we focused on the plot and others where we focused on the character. And I think when we talk about the plot-driven movies, those are the ones where we have to walk through the plot because it's all essential to it. When we did Die Hard or The Sting, every scene is important. And not to say that scenes in this movie aren't important, but it's the character development that comes from them that is more important, in my opinion.
Yeah, we figure if people want to see the movie, they'll watch the movie, and we're here to do commentary on what makes it a good or bad movie. But yeah, so going through the plot in detail for a character-driven movie doesn't make sense, but we still have to discuss just, a few elements to be able to kind of
refresh everybody. Yeah, we have to have a basic recap.
This movie stars Anne Hathaway as Andy, and she is a budding journalist. Kevin, you like this sequence, a lot of cross-cutting.
Yeah, so it shows you how Andy is getting ready in the morning, comparing that to with all the cross-cutting of the models who are getting ready to go to work. Andy is relatively simple. She has a very modest way of dressing. She lives in a modest apartment with her boyfriend, whereas these models are putting on designer clothing and even designer underwear, and they're kissing their model boyfriends and living in these lavish pads. But
Kevin, you keep calling them models. I think they're just employees of the company, but that's how serious they take it, is they look like runway models.
Well, they are runway models. There are a lot of runway models in this playing assistants or employees of runway.
This movie stars Anne Hathaway as Andy, and she is a budding journalist who is trying to kind of make a name for herself in New York, and she takes a job as one of Miranda Priestley's.
So we should point out that Miranda is the editor of Runway magazine, which is basically another version of Vogue, the fashion magazine. Andy doesn't know a thing about fashion. She doesn't know a thing about who Miranda is or her legacy. And she shows up where Emily Blunt plays Emily Charlton, who is the senior assistant to Miranda, and she finds out very quickly that, she's a fish out of water over here. Miranda Priestley. So she's supposedly based on Anna Wintour, who I believe is still the editor of Vogue. Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
She's the title character. She is Lucifer if he had a sense of style. And you would probably think he does have a sense of style. That's how he seduces you.
You gotta dress to impress.
Well, this is a more lighthearted depiction of the devil. I mean, if we wanted to go full on, we could do The Exorcist next year for Halloween, so...
Yeah, we'll keep it light for this episode. Andy's kind of phoning it in for the first several weeks of the movie.
Yeah, she's really just there for the purpose of networking until she realizes that if she wants to succeed here, she's going to have to adapt and change. And so she goes from being a fashion outsider to visiting the stylists and figuring out how to impress everybody over there. Mm-hmm. And she gains the trust of Miranda, and she rises to be a trusted assistant. This really becomes an ethical dilemma for her. She's going to rise in her career, but at what cost to her relationships with everybody else around her? And she finds out that there's a lot of politics that come with this. A big theme that has been discussed with this movie is the analysis of the hero's journey, which has been elaborated on by anthropologists such as Joseph Campbell. And
oh, Kevin, we did postmodern and last week. We gotta...
I think this is going to be a little easier to explain than postmodernism, which deals with a lot of surreal elements and challenging constructives and narratives.
I agree. Hero's journey is a good thing to learn, and it's important for any kind of storytelling, and this movie does a great job demonstrating that.
So you have a webpage up about the hero's journey. Is there any way you can give everybody a brief synopsis of it?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's little variations or details that might get left out, but basically the way it goes is you have the call to adventure, you have a supernatural aid, which doesn't have to be like a ghost or something. And then you have the helper and the mentor. Mentor in this movie, Nigel. Challenges and temptations, and then you have the helper again, the revelation, and then transformation, anointment, and return.
And I think you can find this in so many movies. Joseph Campbell, who wrote about this, has famously said that George Lucas was his greatest student. You can see a lot of parallels to that with this movie as well. So one of my other favorite details is not just the antagonist being Miranda and the mentor being Nigel, but you also have the comic relief, which is Emily.
She is funny in a very unapologetically British...
You wouldn't entertain this in real life. You wouldn't bother tolerating it in real life. But when it's on the big screen, it becomes entertaining.
Well, it's such a deviation from the way somebody's supposed to act. You kind of got to laugh at it.
When we talk about the hero's journey, Nigel does take on the role of a mentor, kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker or Gandalf to Frodo Baggins and Bilbo Baggins. After Miranda has given her this terrible, terrible, terrible experience, she goes to Nigel and cries to him and basically says, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. And Nigel has to basically tell her like it is. Like, no, you are not cut out for this. You've demonstrated you don't care about this job. As Nigel points out, this is a job that so many people would die to work for, but you only deign to work here.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that's kind of what got her hired, is that she's not trying to stay in the fashion industry and work her way up, but you kind of have to do the job. And Nigel is somebody who is at Runway because he loves fashion and wants to get to basically Miranda's level at some point in his career.
And he sends her down to the styling department and gives her a haircut and helps her pick out a new outfit. And she suddenly everybody's suddenly taking her seriously.
Getting to some other stuff about Nigel, I mean, well, he is the only person really that Miranda respects at the table.
You go so far as to say maybe that they're even close friends, because we have that scene that we talk about, scene 119A, where it's the only scene where Andy is not in the movie. She's in the next scene immediately after that, but the major point they're making is that in this scene, nobody is impressing Miranda at the meeting except Nigel. Nigel knows what to do, and it's very clear that he outranks everybody over there. He takes the job much more seriously, and he understands Miranda, and Miranda appreciates him.
Yeah, and I would check out this video by, I believe his name is James Woodall on YouTube, and he breaks down this scene. But it's a very interesting scene, and a lot happens to kind of keep the movie moving forward.
Yes, and just for everybody's reminder, when you Google it, it's scene 119A.
And the A designating that it was something they kind of squeezed in, probably, because that, when you write a script and you print out a couple hundred copies, you don't reprint the script every time. You're going to change out just a page or two here, and you print it on a different color paper. Just some fun information about the operations of scripts. But yeah, so that's another interesting detail. 119A.
And now we got to get on to the title character, not Lucifer, but Miranda Priestley. Miranda, played by Meryl Streep, is allegedly based on Anna Wintour. My favorite stories were her reactions to it. The first detail that I found was that she privately said she thought the movie would go straight to DVD, but publicly she claimed it was entertaining and was happy that it was bringing fashion into the mainstream audiences, but that was probably just,
politics.
Yeah, because apparently David Frankel, the director, met her again at a tennis tournament not long after, and he introduced himself, and they were shaking hands, and he brought up, I directed The Devil Wears Prada, and she immediately yanked her hand out of his grip.
There's also an interview on YouTube where it's Meryl Streep and Anna Wintour sitting down, and they start the whole thing with, "We're not going to talk about the movie. We're not going to talk about it. We don't talk about that around here."
Yeah. And the most interesting thing about this movie was that, not shockingly, Meryl Streep was nominated for an Oscar for it. She seems to be nominated for an Oscar for nearly everything she does.
Yeah, and we should talk about her performance in this, because she could have taken it two very different directions. And initially, I believe that it was thought that this was going to be a very loud, intimidating type character, somebody like Gordon Ramsay, who's screaming and throwing stuff, and that's what's going to cause the intimidation. But she said, no, let's do it subtly. Let's play it cold and calculated.
Yeah, and one of my favorite details was that she said she didn't base it on Anna Wintour. She based it on men she knew, because there were not many prolific women executives out there to base it off of.
Yeah, Kevin, you've talked to me about this scene from The Irishman with Joe Pesci, and I thought that's a great demonstration of this kind of way of going about this intimidation.
So we all know Pesci as this loose cannon psychopath from all these gangster movies, but in The Irishman, he plays the mob boss who is calm, calculated, willing to negotiate and compromise, but he sends it all home. He's still intimidating.
And on top of being intimidating, Miranda is quite unreasonable.
Yeah, like the first instance is when she wants Andy to get her a flight home from Miami, despite the fact that there's a hurricane going on.
Yeah, distortion 101. You see out the window, she's like, oh, it's just a little drizzle, and there's a big lightning strike, and bang, and
you're seeing the tree being like torn out from its roots by the wind.
Yeah. She clearly has her own kind of frame of reference that is not set in reality, which is demonstrated by your favorite example.
Yes. One of the tasks that she gives Andy is that she has to get a copy of the 7th Harry Potter book for her children to read. So some people listening to this episode might not remember how big of a deal it was when we were anticipating the final Harry Potter book to be published. But apparently, not long after this movie was released, J.K. Rowling got in a little bit of trouble because she was going through airport security and she refused to hand over a briefcase which had a copy of the final draft of the 7th book. And my other favorite detail, I noticed this when I was going over a few things in the last few days, is that one of the tasks that Miranda gives her, just in passing, is Andy is seen walking her dog, which is yanking her across the street. And it's this big St. Bernard dog. And if you know anything about these dogs, they're very energetic, they're very playful, they're very friendly, which is quite the juxtaposition to Miranda being cold and distant.
Even though Miranda is this intimidating, unreasonable person, there's still some redeeming quality to her.
When we find out that she's going through a divorce, she inadvertently lets it out to Andy, and you start to feel sorry for her because we all know people who have gone through divorces and they're never fun. Nobody's happy and careless and casual about it. You start to feel sorry for her.
Yeah, and Meryl Streep plays this part so well. You could tell in the scene that she had been crying, but she's pulling it together in front of Andy to try to still command some respect. And one of my favorite lines that I used with you the other day because we were supposed to get going and you needed to do something, I was, by all means, move at a glacial pace. You know how that thrills me.
It's one of those moments that really drives you to sympathize with her, because the next scenes following that, Andy finds out that the board at Runway is looking to replace Miranda as the editor. And you get these moments where Andy's trying to get the news out to Miranda to try to help her. And at this moment where they're at a luncheon and she's going to be announcing that Nigel will be receiving this major promotion that they were discussing earlier. Nigel's really excited. And you see, I think in the scene, he's holding Andy's hand, the camera's closing in, you're just anticipating it. But at the last second, she announces somebody else is getting the job. And Nigel says, well, I can only hope that she'll repay me at some point, to which Andy has to ask, are you sure about that? And he has to acknowledge, no, I can't. And Miranda shares that, she knew the entire time they were trying to replace her, but she made a political move by saying, if you fire me, I'm taking everyone with me because they owe me everything. So she sold out a close friend of hers who was one of the only people that she trusted just to save her skin.
Classic kind of politician.
But I love at the end, after Andy has moved on to another job, she makes eye contact with Miranda as she's getting in her car. And as Andy walks away, Miranda gets back in the car, and we see her smile for the first time in the movie. So there's kind of that moment like, yeah, she's a cold-hearted woman, but you do still kind of like her.
She's good at what she does, and there are some, bumps and bruises along the way, but there's something to her.
Here's what I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking about is Emily Blunt's character, Emily Charlton.
But yes, Emily is the jester.
Yeah, well, Emily is, when we talk about the hero's journey and the tropes over there, and Emily is really the comic relief. She clearly takes the job much more seriously than Andy does, and that she's a workaholic, and you always see her rushing around somewhere, which was Emily Blunt's idea, to really give an impression like, hey, she takes the job seriously. She's always in a hurry. She's always stressed about something.
Yeah, if there's nothing to stress over, she finds something to stress over.
Yeah, which is kind of like me. I always find something to stress over, but mine's more and it's like, maybe you should talk to a therapist about that. This is her just saying, like, I want to succeed in my job.
Some people, it's I don't know if it's a masochistic thing or what, but yeah, they really take their job to that a degree that is unhealthy.
I think the good analogy between the two characters, Andy is approaching this from a political way, kind of like Miranda, which I think is why she's able to earn her trust later, is that she's just approaching like, look, I'm just trying to get ahead. I'm willing to do what I can to get ahead. Whereas Emily is religious. The fashion is what her life is based around. And she has a devotion to Miranda, which is basically worship. And one of the signs is that she eagerly anticipates her annual trip to Paris, and she wants to look good when she goes there. So she goes through some dramatic methods to lose weight, which, I don't know if you could quite call it an eating disorder.
Yeah, but crash dieting, it is pretty close to starving yourself.
Well, I mean, she is starving herself, but I don't think this is portrayed in a way which is like, okay, this is a real eating disorder. You might need to be hospitalized. This is a more comical version of it.
It's clearly not something that's ongoing. It's made apparent that, yes, this is a temporary thing to get ready for Fashion Week, which ends up...
I think it's very interesting that as Andy is engaging in the politics of the job, she eventually gains trust from Miranda over Emily. She takes priority, and Emily is now doing the menial tasks that Andy was doing, like getting coffee and everything like that.
I love the way that they demonstrate this in the movie with a little bit of interaction with the props. And basically, when Miranda comes in, she throws her coat and purse on the lower assistant's desk, which has been Andy throughout the whole movie until Emily kind of falls behind, and then you see Miranda look at Andy's desk, and she then goes and tosses the stuff onto Emily's desk.
It's quite a reversal of fortune, and you could imagine the toll that it takes on her, because somebody who once mocked is now surpassing you.
So she's suffering a cold, but also kind of burnt out. But that's not the only thing that happens and why she can't go to Fashion Week.
It's because she got hit by a car. But like we said, everything in this movie is ultimately lighthearted, because you can even tell going into it. You see the establishing shots of all the cars, and even earlier in the movie how everyone's jaywalking. They're trying to make sure they don't get hit. You can tell she's about to get hit. But the music has a lighthearted, comical tone. So you know she's going to get hit, but you're not as devastated by it. You see her in the hospital later, and it's like, oh, poor Emily.
It is very comedic, because you mentioned the music, and then I rewatched the movie and definitely heard that the music was lighthearted. But also, she has these boxes of scarves. The scarves go everywhere. It's like, if a jester was to kind of do some slapstick there, and then in the hospital, you can tell she's really not that injured. I mean, she's
got a broken leg, but...
Yeah, but in the scheme of things, I mean, she's not even worried about that. She's pissed that she's not going to Fashion Week.
And it's so funny because, like we said, she was starving herself this whole time, and she just rips open the packet of chocolate pudding, and she starts eating it in this, like, very angry, comedic manner. Yeah.
Not even to enjoy it, just eating it for the sake of eating it because she's pissed off.
Well, like we said, as the comic relief in the movie, do you happen to have a favorite funny moment with her?
I like the scene where Andy calls her on the phone, and this is after Fashion Week, and she's like, will you do me a favor? And she is very passive-aggressive, Emily, and she's like, well, what favor could I possibly do for you? And then Andy gives her the clothes from Fashion Week, and because she talked about how much she wanted the clothes, and you could just see her kind of light up, and she then gets kind of sarcastic. She's like, well, I don't know, maybe I can help you with that. And it's cute, it's fun. I love the interaction in that moment,
and it's so wholesome because it not only it's brilliant storytelling, because it helps tie up a loose end in which Andy, she's moved on from the job, but she's ending her relationship with Emily in a positive way, and you could tell that it's worked because the new assistant is there, and Emily tells her, you have big shoes to fill.
And it also kind of shows the juxtaposition with Miranda, because Miranda she's not going to go apologize to Nigel or kind of make up with him on that, but yet Andy, she makes sure to leave on good terms with people that she worked with.
Okay, now why don't we start talking about the whole chick flick concept?
All right, Kevin, we got to talk about it.
We hear the term tossed around. We've heard it tossed around our whole lives, chick flick. And I don't know about you, but every time I heard chick flick, it was really used in a condescending way. It's like a movie that is geared towards women, and it's, generally rom-coms, and you would think, oh, it's not that special of a movie. But when you look at some of the examples of chick flicks over the years, you have Grease, Dirty Dancing, Ghost, Sleepless in Seattle, Titanic, Legally Blonde, 13 Going on 30, and Bridesmaids.
I mean, those are some great movies that you have in there. And I think, it's an interesting term. I mean, think about the Barbie movie. We didn't really hear that term chick flick, but it would have kind of probably fallen into the category with some of those other ones.
Well, Barbie was really challenging social norms. It was challenging sexism and patriarchy and all these subjects that we have been discussing for the last few years. It was a very thought-provoking movie, on top of being very entertaining.
And the other thing, too, that's interesting that you brought up at one point was that there's also the action movie, and there's a lot of those that it's kind of gets diminished, but there are some really smart ones there that, especially like the Nolan Batman films.
We brought up Titanic, and that was made by James Cameron. And Cameron generally tends to have a good leading lady in these movies. The hero is a woman, the heroine, not the drug, but the yeah.
The first time I heard that, I was like, wait, what did they call her?
You look at the first 2 Terminator movies, it's about Sarah Connor, and he even made the sequel to Ridley Scott's movie Alien, and Sigourney Weaver in this movie playing Ellen Ripley, she was nominated for an Oscar.
It just goes to show that a label is just that, and there's a wide variety of things you could fit into what is a very blanket term.
Well, it's smart storytelling overall. I mean, chick flick dismisses it, but like we were saying, this is a very intelligent movie overall. It's smart storytelling. Everything makes sense.
What I really like is that it is self-contained. It's not something that, and they're talking about doing a sequel. I mean, who knows what that's going to be, but it was never intended as like, we're going to do this as, a trilogy. No, it's like, okay, we're going to tell a story here in, about 2 hours, and, you could sit down and just get a whole story.
That's what I like about it. And there's some surprising details about this. You brought this up. There's a stunt department in this movie in the credits.
I know. Yeah, I saw this. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people listed in the stunts department and stunt coordinator. I'm thinking, what are the stunts in this movie? And then of course, Emily getting hit by the car.
Because they can't just throw Emily Blunt over there saying, pretend to get hit by a car.
And the thing that we talked about in the 9 to 5 episode is that you have these scenes that it's like these dream sequences or these stunt scenes, but you still have to actually record them. So you have to have the department. You have to go through all those extra elements and pay for them within a production. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah, because there's the whole business side of stunt doubles. Like they talk about this in the very beginning of Quentin Tarantino's most recent movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that you need a stunt double because if your actor is performing the stunt and gets injured, you can't film with that actor anymore.
I forget if we've talked about it before, but you know how Tom Cruise does his own stunts?
Yeah.
So the way that he does that, because he wants to do the stunts, so he takes out a bond on himself for every movie that he's going to be doing the stunts in, which would cover if he gets injured and the delays in production costs that might cause.
Yeah.
Because no insurance company is going to insure the lead actor doing their own stunts.
I just find that so entertaining that one scene in passing just seems so simple on paper, but when you get down to the logistics of everything with production, it's like there's a whole business aspect to it, and there are a whole bunch of people that need to be brought in. Like, have you ever seen Superbad?
I haven't.
So there's a sequence where Jonah Hill's character, he plays an underage high schooler trying to get liquor for a party, and he has one of these daydreams or fantasies in there in which the cop or the security guard in the liquor store breaks open a bottle of booze and cuts his throat with it. And they talked about it in productions, like they needed a whole makeup team in there to be able to make it look like his throat was actually bleeding out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you gotta... Some little thing, like even having a pet or, an animal in the movie suddenly adds a whole nother level of complexity that's not just that you have to deal with an animal. You have to deal with certain insurance things. You have to deal with all sorts of stuff.
That's what I love thinking about it is you're pitching to the investors like, all right, we need X amount of dollars for this scene, which is something that really doesn't have anything to do with the main gist of the movie, but it's a little filler. It's not the meat and potatoes, but it's saying this just adds to the movie, and if we don't have this, it's not going to deliver as well as we projected. So they have to make a business pitch for it.
And talking about that scene, I think it definitely demonstrates this kind of comedic character. So yeah, they did need that scene, and they I guess convinced the investors.
Well, it worked because in the end, it's a cult classic to this day. I don't know if I call it a cult classic, but it's a beloved movie.
It's a classic.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, Meryl Streep was nominated for an Oscar for this performance. And this is one of, let me get the total number over here. One of 21 nominations that she's had throughout her career. She's won 3 for Kramer versus Kramer, Sophie's Choice, and The Iron Lady. And one of my favorite remarks about this, when Steve Martin was hosting the Oscars one year when she was nominated, because she's nominated almost every other year, he brought up how she has most nominations in history, but he retorted, I like to think of it as most losses.
Always brutal, him and Marty Short. Well, what are your final thoughts?
It's a classic. I mean, John Krasinski was right in the way he described it. He said it is channel surfing kryptonite. And this isn't exactly my favorite movie, but if I'm somewhere and everybody else says, let's watch The Devil Wears Prada, I won't be upset by that. I know I'm in for a good time because these are all these likable characters. There are great performances. It's just an all-around great movie.
And having watched it more than one time, I got stuff out of it that I didn't get the first time, and I think it's wonderful. You should definitely check it out if you haven't. And yeah. What do you think about the fact they're doing a sequel?
See, that's where you can kind of push your luck, because generally you look at a movie and you're like, okay, you have a well-told story like this one, and what makes it a good story is that it's resolved in the end. And you have to think to yourself, how can we bring these characters back and give them a new story to tell without it being apparent that we're just trying to milk a cash cow? Because sequels in general don't do very well. I mean, I think of the Hangover movies or Jaws, like we said before. There's not a single sequel to Jaws that turned out well. In fact, the final Jaws movie is considered one of the worst movies ever made.
Yeah, you sent me that Siskel and Ebert clip from time to time. And and
anybody listening to this right now, you have to look up this clip. Siskel and Ebert reviewing Jaws: The Revenge. It is one of the funniest things you will come across.
Brutal. All right, so Kevin, what are we going to be looking at next time?
Well, I think it's long overdue. I'm excited to propose this one because I haven't watched it in a very long time. But The Shawshank Redemption.
All right.
Which, would you believe it, came from the mind of Stephen King.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Stephen King stuff, and you don't even realize it.
And I think it's important because even though this is a movie about a guy being sent to prison for a crime he didn't commit, it's about hope. And, you know, you haven't had to watch too much news lately to realize that, you know, we're going to need a lot of hope to get through the months and years ahead.
Well, if we can help a little bit by talking about this movie, hopefully that does a little something. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Coda Ewell.
And I'm Kevin Gainey.